Hello and welcome to the Schooner Pod. It is a very, very special episode as we talk about the best and only college football game this week, and truly one of the best traditions in college football, the Army-Navy game. Just a spectacle, great times, and here to talk about it with me, educate all of us, is my co-host, Ty Lee. Ty, always a big event. Are you excited? You're decked out in your Navy gear, ready to go. How you feeling ahead of this weekend?
I'm feeling good. I think it's going to be a good game. Bottom line up front, I think that they're two very different teams. I think there's an obvious winner, but a little bit later when we look at schedules, maybe it'll be a little bit more competitive than we think. So I think to start, Bobby, what do you know about the Army Navy game? What are your top things that you know beyond the common knowledge that it's Army versus Navy?
Of course. So, well, obviously, being a big college football fan, you grow up and you know about it because it's the only game on. Starts off early, and the amount of pageantry, everyone walking in before the cadets and the midshipmen walking in, having them march out is obviously great. So from the start to the end, where they both sing their alma maters at the very end. It's just packed full. Having the president, flip the coin. It's just always such an experience for sure. And just alone watching a service academy game, no matter where they are, there's always a lot of cool pomp and circumstance. We got that when Army came to Norman. So having both of them together, it just seems like just a really cool experience.
Yeah, I think one of the things you hit on that I think most people really connect with, like you said, is that pageantry, and then that just super rich. You didn't say it, but you meant it. The tradition there, and the fact that so many things have, real world tie-ins. Like this is why we do this. This is why we, everything else. So there's certainly a lot of ceremony there that is, like you said, just turned up times 100 for the Army Navy game. And it's interesting because you have that rich tradition. This weekend will be the 122nd time they've played. There have been some interruptions here and there. But when you look at both of these schools, when they play the Air Force Academy, another service academy, it's not to demean that game, but it's nowhere near the level that this one is. So Army-Navy, traditionally a neutral site game. As much as they can, they like to play it in Philadelphia, being a pretty decent neutral site from the Naval Academy, which is in Annapolis, Maryland, near Baltimore and D.C., and then the United States Military Academy at West Point, Army, which is in West Point, New York, a few hours north of New York City. So Philadelphia works out as a pretty, fair middle ground, much like the Cotton Bowl does for OU in Texas. So they're not playing there this year. They're playing in New York. Well, they're playing in New Jersey, but at MetLife in New Jersey. So that's a little bit of a change up. New York has been the second most common host of the game, and like I said, they don't really do home and homes. World War II, they played home and homes there just for logistical reasons. And then very interestingly, in 1982, they played in the Rose Bowl, which is a very neat, very, very neat thing. The city of Pasadena wanted it there and ended up paying, I forget the total. I don't know if there's a hard published total, but the city of Pasadena ended up paying for the student bodies who wanted to come and everything else to be able to come out to the game to get that full pomp and circumstance and ceremony. So certainly a lot of really interesting stuff with the venues and like you said, marching out on the field and the traditions and everything else.
Army-Navy at the Rose Bowl is like the most, if you tried to make the most traditional college football thing ever, it would be that. You get especially if you timed it right, where the sunset goes down over the mountains and everything. You can't think of a better scene. Although whenever I think of Army-Navy, for the most part, it's snow, it's grit, it's grime. It's just a hard pounded out football game with two triple option teams. And I've always thought that the atmosphere of Philadelphia, or it's always a northeastern type of venue for the most part. I feel like I associate that as much as as a part of the tradition.
It is, yeah, and it very much is, and it's an interesting thing because the students of both academies, the mids and the cadets, wear their dress uniforms out to the game, so they have very nice suits on, or very weird suits with capes if you're Army, and in these big trench coats and everything else, and everyone is sort of very well dressed, and it's certainly an interesting thing. I think most people will remember last year where it just got so foggy that you could barely even see anything, which didn't really slow these teams down. A lot of run heavy offenses here, which we're about to get into, which personally for me, I think just takes it back to even more of a traditional football game. I know they have, brand new shiny uniforms every year and all sorts of stuff. But when you watch this game, to me, it feels to me, even if you cut out the Army Navy aspect, it feels to me like you're watching a football game around the turn of the century.
Yeah,
You and that's not to talk down on their play styles, but it feels like pure college football. These guys, a fair amount on each team are recruited athletes to some extent, but they are they go to a military school. They're locked down on campus. They're not. Um, going out and getting to live the typical athlete life. They're both Army and Navy are top 10 schools easily academically. Both of them very engineering heavy. So these are guys that are essentially going to an Ivy League level school academically, academically superior to a few Ivy League schools, I'd argue, especially the people in engineering, and they're doing all the things that normal college athletes are doing, waking up at 4 or 5 a.m. to go to practice, going and doing all of their football requirements, but they're not skipping class. They can't. They're not. They have required study hours. They have all sorts of extra, military stuff. They have defined eating times. Both student bodies eat breakfast, lunch, and dinner all together in these big Hogwarts style dining halls. So very regimented life, but they're very much, not that student athletes aren't, but they're very much students of their universities first, and athletes second, which is another thing to me that makes it feel a little bit more like college football. And not to get into the whole argument of, whether or not NIL or anything else is a factor ruining college football, or the commercialization, or whatever. But the fact of the matter is that at the schools that we're used to watching, right? Big 12 football, SEC football, Big 10 football, pretty much everyone you see out on those fields playing is a recruited athlete that is, there to play football, and not that they're not smart enough to, but a lot of them are going to the schools that they're going to simply because of football. You obviously have the people that grow up with a loyalty to a school, but it's just a different atmosphere in that way. And I always like to say that Service Academy football is much more the pure college football experience. So I implore people to watch, not only because of the history and the patriotism and the military pomp and circumstance and stuff, but if you're just a fan of college football, it's not going to be really high scoring. There's going to be some sloppy stuff. The level of play is not going to be Power 5 across the board, but it's pure.
yeah, and like you said, the people there at the academies are there for things that are way bigger than football. Football is just kind of an activity that they're enjoying and partaking in, but it's not number one. It might not even be number two for them. And I think that's something that's just truly cool. And now talking about service academy life, the differences between the two schools has to be interesting. Obviously different branches, and I think that's cool. That leads into one of the cooler traditions they have, the prisoner transfer, where they have a couple Navy students, or maybe it's just one stay in West Point, and then a couple, Army people in Annapolis, and they switch them at some point during the game. I've always thought that was very unique.
Yeah, it is. It's more than one. I think it's around a dozen for each school. So, but yeah, the service academies have, obviously it's a non-traditional college experience, but they do have what they would term a sort of study abroad, and midshipmen can go I'm not familiar with the full scope of the Army, but for the Naval Academy, I'm sure it's similar. Midshipmen can go and spend a semester at West Point is the most common one. They can also go spend a semester at the Air Force Academy, which is fairly common for people that want to fly. The Coast Guard Academy as well, who's a much smaller school. They do play football, but they're like D3, and then foreign service academies like in mostly Europe and parts of Asia. So
Cool.
but yeah,
No, it's so cool.
that's a thing at the Army Navy game, so that the students of their respective schools can sit with their schools. They are exchanged, because otherwise, the way the seating works is the whole student bodies come and they're seated by their units, which at the Naval Academy at least is their sort of their dorm hall. So they live in the dorms their entire college semester, and their dorm floor, level, or deck, depending on the building and everything else, is sort of your unit. And that's who you are with the entire time and who you sit with. So very Hogwarts experience in that respect as well.
For sure, for sure. Can you tell me about the goat thievery that we have going on? I know you mostly have your outline set, but I gotta ask,
Yep.
what's up with the goat thievery?
So there's a rich tradition of mascots, thievery, and sort of hijinks at the service academy. So one of the things to know is that it is very much it's a military school. They're boarding schools, and they're not easy places. They're academically, they are not easy places at all, and you don't have very much free time off. They're very stressful environments, is what I'm getting at, and the people that are going there are generally very high performing, people that want to succeed, have succeeded their entire life up to that point. So the type of people that get upset when they get an A minus in high school, and so you get to the service academies and it can be very challenging, to even pass. And so it's a very stressful environment, and that sort of confined environment breeds just a ton of pranks being a cultural thing. And it's very interesting because there's this rich history of pranks at both schools throughout the school year, and just weird intricacies that develop in these ecosystems that these things create. So at West Point, you'll be hearing stories of pranks that people that went on to become president did as their time there, or you'll be hearing these famous admirals of American history, or astronauts, and everything else, and hearing about just the crazy pranks that they did while they were there. So there was a rash of pretty severe mascot thievery. So both schools have live mascots. Army has mules, or a mule. Navy has goats, one goat that comes, but they'll retire the old ones. And things, most interestingly, this year, the Army students attempted to steal a goat and stole one of the old retired geriatric ones, unintentionally, I might add, because they broke into the farm where the goats are being held, and there wasn't like another vault door that they couldn't get into that the current one was in. They just didn't figure out which one they wanted to get, so they ended up getting an old geriatric one that had only one horn left and arthritis and stuff, who was promptly returned, I might add. But things really came to a head in the early 2000s when some Navy students went up to New York to steal Army's mules, and they were far too committed to the thievery of the mule to turn back if anything went wrong. And long story short, they ended up leaving Army with the mule. They also left campus with 8 individuals from Army's custodial staff and everything else, and I think some students who they captured along the way to preserve secrecy and tied up and abandoned on the side of the road. And then they were also at one point pursued by local law enforcement, and they broke a police officer's arm, which they also got away with.
Oh my gosh.
But yeah, there was a pretty firm crackdown. So it is something that is sort of encouraged, but very much also still cracked down on. One of those, if you can get away with it, you can. But you better watch yourself.
Don't get into the point of injuring law enforcement.
You should not be human trafficking people and assaulting law enforcement officers to leave with a mask on. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just a prank, bro. Is not really a good way to get out of a crime.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyways,
So I think to dive into the game a little bit more, right off the start, like we said, they're both very run heavy teams, offensively and then defensively. Uh, Sort of like a lot of other teams. This is one of the big criticisms of OU. Maybe in the past when we went to the playoffs was we were facing teams that were very different than us. But a lot of times you're very tempted to sort of have a defense that's basically just designed to beat your offense, which was an issue that OU had in the playoffs. We just couldn't compete with Bama and Clemson and whatnot and their offensive styles when we had a defense designed to defeat like a spread, air raid, um, whatever. So Army and Navy's defenses both are very much set up to beat their offenses. Which creates an interesting atmosphere in this game because they're almost designed to play each other all the time. So Army is coming in 8-3 right now. They're going to a bowl game. They're playing Missouri, so that's a pretty big game. And 8-3, like I just said, Army has had a really good streak for the past couple years. OU fans will remember when they nearly beat OU in Norman. And that was one of, I think, only 2 losses they had that year. So their head coach, Jeff Monken, has had a ton of offers to go elsewhere because of what he's done at West Point and his just tremendous performance there. And he's chosen to stay so far. So he's very much committed to that school and that environment and has created a tremendous system. I actually was floating his name around as someone I'd like to see OU look at in terms of a head coach, as long as we got, a non-triple option coordinator to go with him. But he's a tremendous coach. Navy coming into the game with a much worse record. So Navy is coming in 3-8, the inverse of Army. But there's a couple things I want to point out. Navy has had a much more challenging schedule. So Navy's losses are to Marshall, the Air Force Academy, who is pretty decent this year, Houston, who they only lost by 8 points to. They beat UCF. They lost to SMU by I think 8 points again. They lost to Memphis. That was a little bit bigger blowout. They lost to Cincinnati by 1 touchdown, 27-20. They beat Tulsa. They lost to Notre Dame with a pretty big margin, and then they lost to ECU. So Navy has a bad record, but they've had some really good performances against some really good. I mean, if you're a 3-8 team and mid to late season you lose to a playoff team by 7 points, that's a pretty big deal.
yeah, absolutely. And Army has had some tougher teams, on their schedule, but they lost to them. Wisconsin only lost by 6, and then they lost a very weird shootout to Wake Forest at home. So it's interesting because while Army has, like you said, while they have the better record, they feasted on the UConns, the Miami Ohios, and the Bucknells of the world. So that is interesting because growing up, it used to be Navy was independent, Army was also independent. But now that you have Navy, in the American, I kind of wonder if that's like a benefit or, a negative in terms of situations for both, Army staying independent versus Navy being in a conference. I don't know if that's a hindrance or a help for a team like Army. Like, should they join a conference or, do you think that would kind of hurt them a bit?
I don't necessarily know that it matters that much with the service academies specifically. I guess there would be a finite number of, if we look at sort of the recruiting aspect, you have to be willing, when you're going to these schools to know the type of school you're going to, and then the fact that depending on some other things, but the fact that you're going to spend at least 4 years, or potentially 5, I think Army might be 5, active duty in the military upon graduation, even more if you're in some sort of specialist field. So it's somewhere that you have to go, in high school, knowing that you want to commit to that for the next decade, essentially. So it is recruiting, they're already dealing with a pretty small pool. Obviously there's a handful of people. If you're willing to play at a service academy, maybe you want to go to Navy to play at a in bigger games than um, the Mountain West with Air Force, and then Army being independent. But they don't really. It's not as much of a business like the rest of college football, so I don't know that the matchups necessarily matter too much.
Yeah, for sure. In terms of recruitment, it again doesn't matter. There are bigger factors than would I rather play Bucknell or would I rather play UCF. So.
Yeah, and I believe Army is conferenced in other sports, and that's they're very much honestly, if they were to fit into a conference, like I said, it would be the Ivy League. Fits them geographically, fits them academically, for sure. Fits them sort of culturally as well to an extent with their sort of types of athletes. So, but I mean, both schools are much better off in terms of opponents than what the Ivy League schools are getting. So maybe I think the argument is that they're probably fine where they're at.
Yeah, for sure. Let's talk a little bit more about football. So, in terms of impact players, who on each side are some people we should watch for, I guess, that you've kind of noticed?
So the biggest guy for Army, we'll just sort of do one per side, is their quarterback, Christian Anderson, obviously with a sort of an option style run heavy offense. That's going to be your main guy, the guy that's touching the ball on every play. And he's up there in the rushing yards as well, but he's not his pass numbers are pretty funny. He's at 44 attempts this year, which is pretty crazy, and 21 completions. So almost too small of a sample size. The fact that we're 2 weeks into December to look at. On the Navy side of ball, or on the Navy side of the ball, I don't know why I said it that way. Their key player is going to be Diego Fajo.
Oh, I know you're talking about.
So I'm honestly not entirely sure how his name is actually pronounced.
We know how it's not pronounced.
Pronounced in a risky way, and he's a linebacker. He's a senior linebacker out of Fort Lauderdale, and he has constantly been. He was a preseason sort of look or receiving votes or whatever to be a legitimate first or second team All-American in all of college football last year, and has constantly been in the AAC All-American sort of first and second roster his entire time there. So I think it's Army we've seen is the better offensive team. Like we touched on a second ago, Army went and had a shootout with Wake Forest where I can't do the quick math in my head, but they had Army scored 56 points in that game, and Wake Forest scored 70. So Army is certainly coming in with a much better offense, and Navy, they're going to have to lean heavy on their defense to really try to shut that down to have any chance. And even then, I'm not sure if they do, because I really do think it comes down to the fact that Army doesn't put up points much faster, but they very much can put up points, which has led to the spread being between 7 and 7.5 right now, depending on where you're looking, which I think is a pretty juicy spread for a game that will most likely be settled by probably a score. So Army is not tremendous. They're 6-5 against the spread this year. Navy is 7-4 against the spread this year. Interestingly enough, I kind of looked. Army's been favored spread-wise in a lot of their stuff, and Navy has been the underdog in pretty much all of their stuff. So you can make the argument that when you're a double-digit underdog in most of your games, it's much easier to cover the spread than when you're favored. But it is certainly an interesting game to look at gambling-wise, even if it's, not to promote this, but if you have to put some money on a game to be really interested in it, it's probably worth a few dollars. It's the only game this week. So
yeah, no, it's always fun. Just throw in, maybe just mosey on over to DraftKings Sportsbook with promo code TPPN. I don't know if that, I don't know, feel kind of weird, promoting off that, but it's okay. Use DraftKings if you're going to do it. But no, I agree. Making that, it's never a bad idea to make a bet. It's always fun, and this is one of those games where you definitely have to entertain the idea of the under. But at the same time, this Army team putting up 56 points with the spread, or with not the spread, with the triple option is just insane. So, Ty,
the over under, right before we wrap, I forgot to mention that the over under at 34.5. It seems low for a college football game, but that might be a juicy thing to look at.
Yeah, absolutely. So, all right, Ty, anything else before we wrap up? What's your prediction for the game?
I don't
/ other things.
Yeah, I don't necessarily have one score-wise. As much as it pains me to say it, I think Army gets the cover and the win here. Certainly looking at their records and their ability to put up points. So I think an Army cover is the smart move here, but I would love to see my mids upset the Black Knights here this weekend.
Yeah, I'm also going to go Army. That half point, it's tricky. We always talk about how rivalry games, anything can happen, but I feel like Army-Navy tends to be very different, especially in recent history. I don't know. Those games could be close. I feel like Army or Navy recently just had a bout of just dominance in the series, but Army's kind of fought back and become a bit of the better team. But that being said, Navy still has a pedigree. They still have very solid success in the past, and it's Army-Navy. This is going to be a war. That's a crappy thing to say. It is not going to be a war because there are actual wars. This is just a very fun football game, and at the end of the day, they're all on the same side, and I think that the respect between the two sides is always just really cool. It's the perfect blend of hatred and respect, because it's not true hatred, it's rivalry. And that's why this is one of the best rivalries in sport total, let alone college football.
For sure. And just sort of the last thing doesn't tie into the podcast medium well, but be sure to go and check out the uniforms this year. Navy came out with a really cool naval aviation Fly Navy inspired uniform. And West Point is wearing an old school sort of one-to-one translation of a camo uniform from the early days of the War on Terror to recognize the Special Forces guys that went and kicked that off. So go look. They're pretty polarizing uniforms. Personally, I think Navy just had it, and then Navy has a weird obsession with airbrushed helmets that just completely, I think, threw this uniform off. But I'm firmly in the boat that the Fly Navy uniforms are much better than Army's this year. I did camo uniforms are not the move in football, but go give it a look and be sure to hit us up on our socials with your opinions on that.
Yeah, no, the uniform history has always been really cool. It's a great recent tradition as of late. And I gotta say, the video Navy did with the planes has to be the most expensive uniform reveal of all time. So.
Yeah, it may actually be one of the most expensive minute and a half college football videos of all time, for sure.
The video of the player running next to the plane,
racing a fighter jet on foot. Yeah,
I don't think that one looked as cool as they thought it would.
No.
Incredible. Well, Ty, thank you so much for hopping on and giving us a little bit of history behind Army-Navy, a little bit of insight and everything, and I, for one, cannot wait to watch it, and my viewing experience will be better because of what I learned today. So
go Navy, sink Army.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. This has been the Schooner Pod. We will see you next week when we talk a little bit of bowls and check in on what's going on with OU and the coaching staff change. So for me and Ty, have a good one. I don't know. I almost said go Navy beat Army, but I'm kind of on the Army side. So go Army beat Navy.